If y'all want to come in a little closer here, and we're going to talk about the field, talk about the shapes that it's in or not in, and why I have or haven't planted the cover crops yet. I mowed it. It was planted in a cover crop called Laredo soybeans. Okay, they are a forage soybean. They're quite often intersowed into pastures, and they're used for hay. And they are all high protein crops, right? This is alfalfas and clovers and beans and peas, and even there are trees. You know these trees with the big thorns on them, right? The honey locust, that's a legume. Any kind of plant you see that has a compound leaf, it has a bean type of a seed pod, and has a pea type flower. If you've ever seen a flower of a pea, even clover, if you take it down and look at each individual tiny little flower, looks like a tiny little pea flower. So anything on those classes, and there are others, like a Kentucky coffee tree is a legume. And there's another, what is it, black locust is a legume. These are big. And this is how the rest of the plant community is able to access nitrogen in the soil, is mostly through the activity of legumes. And so here we planted a crop of soybeans. Before it left, I have a big problem out here with Johnson grass. You can see it growing over here. If it gets 4 inches tall, right, there's enough leaf material there for it to start packing energy back into a rhizome. And so I let it get up here about this tall, and the beans were about this, they were starting to bloom, and so I terminated them by simply mowing them. Okay, take a brush hog and just mow them. There are better ways to do it. You know, a brush hog tends to kind of windrow things over into a row, and then you have trouble with equipment kind of tangling up in it and so forth. Here I'm going to disc. Everybody know what this piece of equipment is? A disc has a front pair of a gang of discs that are kind of pointed outward and forward, and the rear pair, they tend to take and roll over soil and knife into it a little bit and throw it outward. And then the back set of gangs gathers it back in more or less to where it was and gets a second chance to chop up a particle size. And I did not disc here, most of it, because it's so dry that it's windy and it makes a lot of dust. I disked this up just this little bit because I wanted to show you this is all that it needs to be, okay? And big clods like this, okay? This tool, the disc, will dish this up into something you can get to look about like an ash bed, right? But it's a bad practice to do so. The first rain you get will have this thing cake over, and whatever you do plant in there will have a hard time pushing up through that hard pan. And that's there's a caveat to that because of the time of the year it is, okay? So cloddy soil will promote fewer weeds, right? You have tiny little weeds. So something like a bean has a lot of energy in it, right? There's still that tiny little fleck that's the germ, the actual living part of the seed. But it's got the rest of that thing to push a seed all the way up through several inches of soil, right? If a tiny little seed, a grass seed here, drops in between a couple of clods, it might germinate when it gets down there. But it doesn't have the energy to be able to push up through, right? And will terminate itself. It runs out of gas, you might say. If you plan to get a rain, you could come over this and direct seed just by broadcasting, right? If you had a good hand crank seeder, this is a seed drill. This is a device that meters out seed very, very carefully, very, very precisely, and opens up a furrow. There's a drill that plants things in rows that are close together, and a planter that plants them further apart. So this is called a seed drill. Some people call it a grain drill or a wheat drill. I use it to plant my cover crops here in the fall. I typically plant a mixture of hairy vetch and rye. So rye is a grass and grows up pretty tall, and vetch is a tangly, I mean, if you just grow it, you almost have to grow them in concert with each other to get the best benefit out of it, okay? What happens is the rye comes up and the vetch comes up too. And it says, well, hell, we got to get up above the vetch here. And the vetch on the tip of each one of the leaves it has a little tendril, just like a grape does, right? And so it uses the ryegrass as a trellis. They say that you can get as much as 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, harvesting that directly from the atmosphere, okay? For the cost of the seed, and the cost of your time, and the cost of diesel fuel or whatever you're putting it out there with, okay? These are the seed boxes for the hairy vetch and rye. And you see down in the bottom there's this thing that looks like a gear, right? And those, the spaces in between the teeth of the gear is where the seeds accumulate, and then the gear turns and it drops them down to the soil level, okay? The hairy vetch and rye in this case get put into those drills, and if you were going to plant grass seed or clover, it would just kind of scatter it on top of the soil, much like you would broadcasting. Here you can see several different crops, and then you have how many pounds per acre you're putting on here, and then up here there's a number that corresponds to a device over here that tells you how much is being metered out per acre. So this is made for working in ground that has been disturbed. It's been plowed, it's been disced, it's not made for taking out across a pasture. So that's what a no-till drill is. They're very heavy. They'll have hard springs that mash those down into the soil. The delivery system on it is almost identical. The metering system on there with the little gears. But they have the capacity to not only knife through the soil, okay, and make a drill into compacted soil like this and through forages, okay? And then they have a couple of covering wheels in the back, and they're very heavy, and they have a high spring pressure that pushes them down to close up that drill behind it. So why do you want to grow cover crops anyway, right? I plant the soybeans, Laredo soybeans, in the summertime. Maybe I've got a crop of greens, lettuces or spinach, that kind of thing, and it's done. Or I might plant a crop called buckwheat, and I plant buckwheat because it's only about maybe 10-week crop, and it's legendary, or it's rumored to be able to pull potassium and other minerals out of the soil. And that's how you get things into the crops that you want, is you bring those out of the soil by a plant that has root acids on it that will etch those things out of the soil. They become plant tissues. Those plant tissues deteriorate in the soil, and they become available to your crop, yeah? And honestly, weeds, grasses, everything does the same thing. I'm boosting my organic content. I am holding on to soil from erosion. I have living root systems in the soil, which everything else is feeding on, as well as they do a better job. Guys that are planting 1,000 acres of corn and they just let it sit there all winter long and get warm in the day and cool off at night, they're not storing any solar energy there, but a green crop will. A winter cover crop steals nitrogen out of the air all winter long, and it stores sunshine, part of that 95%, right? The fact that things burn, and you go over there like a tree over here, that's what you're interested in the wintertime, right? It's cold outside, I go stand by a fire, that's stored sunshine. That's what you're interested in there, okay? So it stores sunshine, holds the soil in place. In my case, it prevents erosion from a soil, from a flood, I mean. These creeks flood, they'll be way over your head. We've had 8 feet deep out here, we've had water. It's kind of stupid to try and imagine it, but it's here, it's real, and it's destructive. So the other thing that they'll hold other crop residues on the ground. Vetch is really good at that because it's this tangly thing. So this stuff here, again, if there were a flood, this would lift and be gone. Be all windrowed down there along there. I know this intimately because I used to mulch my tomatoes with about knee deep in straw, and I get a summertime freak flood and it comes up like a big raft off of the tomato plants and then just goes somewhere other. Yeah, that's really inconvenient. Because they have root systems that stay in the soil. Those are root channels that wind up being water channels as they rot. There are accumulation of organic material. Has anybody had a soil test? Do you have that one thing there called a CEC? You know what that is? Anybody tell me what CEC is?
The cation exchange.
Oh, the nosy. It's cation exchange capacity, okay? So we just spoke about cations. These are the things that the plant is interested in. They're potassium and phosphorus and iron and calcium and magnesium, right? Those are all cations in the soil. Cation exchange capacity. So this is a measure of your soil's capacity to hang on to cations in the soil that are available. They're weakly held. This is not a chemical bond. They're just kind of, we kind of like to be associated with this soil particle or this organic particle, right? So CECs of mineralized soils, soils without much organic material, have a CEC somewhere down in the teens. Whereas if you have, 5%, 7% organic material, they're way up around 30, 40, 50, okay? So this is, you read this as soil fertility, yeah? That's where you realize it. Is it a high CEC? Is a highly productive piece of ground.
So have you ever done any frost seeding of your cover crops?
Frost?
Spring? Yeah.
Yeah, so you rely on the freeze-thaw action of the soil in the springtime, right? And this generally for smaller seeds like clovers and grasses. So in the spring you have, what frost heave, everybody knows water in the soil freezes and it erupts the soil, and then it thaws during the day and it closes up, and then it thaws a little more, right? Or freezes and thaws. So that freeze-thaw cycle there, if you have a seed that happens to be here and it drops down, right? And then it gets covered up the next morning, right? So that's what you're referring to, correct? Okay.
So you mentioned about the mulch with the tomatoes. Is there, instead of just letting like grass and just mowing regular grass in between your produce rows, is there a cover crop that you can plant that maybe it's a little bit better at being stomped on, a little more resilient, that you could get the benefits of the cover crop even as a mulch?
There's a really interesting thing I tried a couple of seasons. White clover, Dutch clover. If you want to leave just kind of, what we might even call it strip till, right? You just knife a trench in a heavy crop of white clover, Dutch clover, and then plant your tomatoes in that. Works pretty well. You have to know a lot of stuff, for doing organic or sustainable pest control, weed control. One of the things you do, rye has a really powerful allelopathic property about it, right? Which means that it frustrates the germination of other crops. You plant rye in the fall because it has to go, it's called a winter annual. It has to go through a cold season like November, December, January, February, before it can go ahead and send up a fruiting head that has what you're interested on it, right? If you plant it in the spring, it just comes up and looks like a heavy thatched lawn if you plant it really, really thickly, okay? And it frustrates the germination of any number of different weeds. Now, it doesn't work on perennial weeds like my Johnson grass here, but I thought, well, I used to grow a lot of winter squash. And so it's like, oh, hell, that's what we're gonna do, is we'll have these nice clean squash growing out on a turf. I like this a lot. We'll have no weed problems because none of them gonna germinate, so forth and so on. And what I found out was I planted the rye and then I planted all my squash, and I got about 25% germination because the rye's allelopathic property came back to bite me. This still has a great deal of potential, I think, if you transplant your squashes into a rye bed, okay? So those are things, parts of cover crops here that aren't widely known, but again, knowing winter annuals, do that. You could probably do that with oats. You could probably do it. Oats don't survive summertime heat here very well. Most oats are grown in the northern latitudes all over you know, northern tier of states and up into Canada. And so the rye does well, wheat would do well here, you know, any of those things, winter annual grasses.
So like right now you can't plant because of the weather conditions. So you're going to have to push it back, and that may contribute to maybe the cover crop not being as thick or successful. But when you do have the stand and you're going to terminate it, and we're having all the rains and you can't get out because it's too mucky, like what problems can come when everything starts really going to seed and getting overgrown? What kind of problems do you see then?
Well, honestly, you know, I've been pushed back a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks, because of a flood, right? That gets kind of wet here. So it hasn't, you know, you have opportunities, you have the optimum time, and then you have times that are not so optimum. Most of the time, what I do with my fall planted winter cover crops is I plow them under. I have a plow I want to show you that I have modified. The hairy vetch and rye will be over my head, 7 feet tall or better. And again, you have to have, if you just use a regular plow on it, you will spend 3 times the time that you should be out here doing that, swearing at it, okay? Wondering why you did this and wondering how we can just cut it and burn it, okay? So that's the solution, was to go ahead and think about how the plow works and make it work. That's, you know, mostly that's what I do, is I just plow them under. And what that does is, of course, is it allows me as a vegetable farmer or bean farmer here is to work with the root side of the cover crop. The cover crop is 8 inches down, and over the course of the summer it just kind of spoon feeds my crop, okay? Be it tomatoes or peppers or whatever, and the what you call it, the organic material stays there. And there's a mat of material several inches thick that gets rolled under. It's powerful. It's a lot of fertility, a lot of biomass, and a lot of nitrogen because of the hairy vetch. And somebody, who was it, was wanting to know about raised beds. Okay, so again, you probably are not interested in having 7 foot tall cover crops out there in your beds. And so the thing to choose is then when to terminate it, right? How do we go ahead and terminate it? Well, we can, you know, just cut it off, pull it up, and lay it over and put it on top of the soil here. How do you deal with the mulch that you put down over your beds? And the question that I pose is, do you till those mulches into the soil when you get ready to plant? And my guess on a small scale is you say, no, I'm not going to till it in. I'm going to leave it on top. And the reason for that is that the soil, the biological material in the soil is hungry for oxygen. And of course, once you get down below about 3 or 4 inches, there's nothing here. We don't have much gas exchange down there, right? But if you till it up like this, or if you run a tiller through it and really aerate it, it's in that word, right? You have incorporated a huge amount of air in there, right? You've solved the biology, the bugs in there, the microorganisms and the fungus and the actinomycetes and everything in there. You've solved the limiting factor there. And so it's hungry. It's hungry for organic material. And it will have this big, huge bloom of biological activity which will collapse, okay? In the meantime, that stuff will pull all those nitrogens that it needs for reproduction and survival. It'll pull all those things and complex them back up into biological things, okay? At the sacrifice of your plants, okay? Again, this is not permanent, okay? Over a period of time, those things will break down as well and release themselves back to your plants. In the meantime, you need to have some supplemental nutrition there. If you're going to plow this stuff up into the ground, you need to have something there that your plants are going to work with. If you have the luxury of a small patch, I would encourage you to not till those things in, leave them on top of the ground. There is no precedent in nature for tilling forages into the ground. And that's kind of the fundamental thing that goes on with organic agriculture, isn't it? We're following a natural system. We're tweaking a natural system to be to our advantage, right? So, what I wanted to show you here is my glorious plow. But this is an Alice Chalmer plow. It's what's called a high clearance plow, and it's always been that. And that means that the shank here that each individual plow hangs from is longer than most, okay? And you'll also notice that underneath of the big framework there is all very straight and flat. Another subtle thing you'll notice is that the shank that the coulter, this is a coulter, the shank that the coulter's on comes out horizontally, runs at 90 degrees angles to the shank here, and then drops down perpendicular again. And the reason for that is if you have an angled, most of them are angled. They come down and they kind of zig here and then down. What winds up with is you'll have stuff ride up on the arm of the coulter. Okay, so what I did to the plow was the unit that was here had those shanks on it, but it had coulters that were much smaller. They were probably 2.5 inches smaller in diameter. And what the coulter does is it knifes through, in most cases, most farmers, it just kind of knifes through the soil a little bit and maybe through a little bit of trash or residue, and then allows the shin of the plow to pick it up and invert it. Not really invert it, but kind of set it over 270 degrees. But that is not enough if you're cutting through, you know, a layer of forages several inches thick. You have to knife through those to actually even be able to touch the soil. And so thus I found another Alice Chalmer plow. It had the typical shanks on it, so I lopped those off and married them up to the ones that came off of the original plow. And you can see they're almost down to the tip, the share, the point of the share on the plow. And I did this, and it was like the clouds opened up and there was a voice from the heavens, and then I just started the tractor and started rolling under cover crops. And so people don't even want to use them anymore, right? But I find that this is the best way for me to terminate these monster cover crops that I have. This just bloody well works. It's a magical, marvelous plow.